Bonham Public Media presents The Hybrid Citizen. We've read a lot about how decisions are made, how resources are allocated, including how bribes are given. We were interested in the true mechanisms of life. And, of course, as you do all these things and keep reading those books, you think that sooner or later you'll be given the chance to exert some sort of influence.
About an oligarch, but that isn't all he is. He was an oligarch in the sense that he's someone who has a great deal of money, that it's closely, he continues to have it because he's closely related to political power, and he works on behalf of that political power in order to make himself even richer. So the idea that it's either an oligarch or an agent is a mistake. He wouldn't be the one if he weren't the other. No one.
This film should not have made it to your screens. Sorry, I have a business. Sorry, I have a family. Sorry, I'm afraid. This is what we heard from those with whom we first started work on this film. Because the protagonist of this documentary is too influential, and many in Latvia, the European Union, and even worldwide are fearful of challenging him. And yet, we are doing it. Because what we are discussing here today is not just another of Putin's oligarchs, not just another member of Putin's inner circle. We are discussing plans for the hybrid occupation of Latvia, the harm that could be wrought by this hybrid citizen, a man some call a patron of the arts, but we consider an agent of the Kremlin here in the Republic of Latvia. Could this become a repeat of the Georgian scenario, whereby a country that has lived through Soviet occupation suddenly finds itself under neo-Soviet hybrid occupation again? Unfortunately, the threat is quite significant. You don't choose your parents. Sons are not responsible for the deeds of their fathers, and even less so, their grandfathers. But the Avens family history is quite noteworthy. Jan, or Jānis Avens, who was he? An ideological Bolshevik, a Cheka investigator. And in 1917, at the height of the Bolshevik Revolution, Jan, or Jānis Avens, served in Lenin's personal guard in Petrograd. This was the Chekist and communist elite. And Putin's oligarch, Petr Aven, is a scion of this rootstock. Interestingly, while Chekist Jānis Avens was guarding Lenin, another seemingly simple and seemingly Russian man was preparing Lenin's meals. Who was it? Spiridon Putin, the grandfather of current Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Whenever we're told someone in the Russian Federation has made it, thanks to their talent or intellect, is it worth taking a good look at their family tree? All too often, as is the case with Aven and Putin, their success can have rather interesting roots. One grandfather guarded Lenin. The other cooked for Lenin. Together, their grandsons took up the reins of power in Russia, and later together began the Russian expansion outside the confines of political, economic, and military influence. However, family history is not the only link between Petr Aven and the KGB. To understand the future oligarch connection to Soviet government institutions, mainly the KGB, we need to take a little excursion into history. Many consider the late 1980s events in the Soviet Union a result of some liberal revolution or dissident action. The reality is somewhat more complicated and terrible. Soviet leadership, or rather its more intelligent members, had long ago come to the realization that the Soviet Union was in crisis. It had enormous economical problems that would be extremely difficult to overcome. So as far back as the 1970s, people with ties to the KGB, like Yuri Andropov, began work on projects for the large-scale transformation of the USSR. The idea at the foundation of these projects was simple. The Soviet Union needed to change, and this change had to be radical. In the words of Andropov, it needed to adapt to civilization. But within the framework of this adaptation, the old state apparatus and ruling strata of government officials still had to retain their positions of power. So whom did Andropov pick as his choice for the future leader of the Soviet regime? From the recollections of former Chekist Kevorkov, whom Kremlin chronicler Yulian Semyonov used as a prototype for his protagonist, we learn that long before Mikhail Gorbachev became a world-famous politician, he was taken under Andropov's wing. Andropov often met with him and discussed state developmental possibilities. He even told the Chekist Kevorkov that the Soviet Union needed a new leader, someone closer to the soil, or, as Kevorkov sarcastically put it, someone from the plow. Andropov made Gorbachev his protege, and Andropov and his KGB wrote the script for the coming changes of perestroika. But this reorganization needed new personnel, people who would be under KGB control, but would be accepted by the West. People who could change the image of the USSR in a way that would be useful to the Soviet nomenklatura and the KGB. Where could such people be found? Looking back into the 1970s, up until 1979, when Soviet troops entered Afghanistan, we see this era as something like a honeymoon between Brezhnev-led USSR and Western Social Democrats. The world seemed to be changing for the better. The Helsinki Accords on post-World War II borders were signed. There were talks on cooperation and peace. Tensions were easing. Soon, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, or IIASA, was established in Vienna, Austria. The location was no accident. A neutral capital of a neutral state, an ideal place for agency operations and covert communication. So the IIASA is established. But who shows up at this Institute for Applied Systems Analysis at the very tail end of the 1980s? This is when Petr Aven, a young employee of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, arrives at the Institute for a lengthy work assignment. As per his own comments on the early stages of his career, we embarked on our service to the Soviet state. While some served in the Soviet armed forces, or the militia, a select few were lucky enough to land a foreign assignment to a capitalist country. So a question arises: how could an employee of the MFA get this job without any ties to the KGB? As a rule, any Soviet citizen about to go on a prolonged trip abroad had to sign a cooperation agreement with the KGB. A Soviet citizen would not be let out of the country without it. Perhaps we are exaggerating. Let's ask someone who is well versed in these matters and has organized such agreements. A KGB veteran who now resides in the United Kingdom. Former operative of Soviet and other intelligence services, Boris Karpichkov. I must agree, it would be highly unusual for a man like Aven. an associate of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis between 1989 and 1991, and also an advisor with the MFA of the USSR, to remain unnoticed and unrecruited by the agency. Under these circumstances, it is difficult to imagine that Petr Aven could have gone to such a place and in such capacity without being a KGB agent. There's just the question of whether he was a simple agent, that is, an informant, or perhaps a special operative. Interestingly, this institute, whose main headquarters were in Austria, also had a subsidiary branch in Moscow. The All-Union Scientific Research Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And if we examine the biographies of the so-called young reformers who led the transformation of the Soviet system into what eventually became the Russian Federation, most of these people have ties to both the Austrian Institute and its Soviet subsidiary. These are the people who created perestroika. The people who helped Yeltsin save both the KGB and the party nomenklatura. And this is the circle of people who did an enormous favor to Vladimir Putin, a favor he undoubtedly has not forgotten. Marius Laurinavičius, political analyst, expert on Russia and China, former fellow at the Hudson Institute. I have researched this regime from its inception, not Putin's ascent to power, but the time before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Based on all the available contemporary public data, I can conclude that he, at the very least, had ties to the KGB, and for this reason, was able to build his career and his business. The entire system at that time was planned by the KGB and implemented by people trusted by the KGB. I would not call it direct proof, perhaps. But there is so much indirect evidence, so many details. He worked at the Austrian Institute, a place which wasn't well known by the public, but was nevertheless very important. And I'm of the opinion, confirmed by publicly available sources, that this institute produced KGB personnel for the reformation of the USSR. The aim of the reforms was to facilitate a KGB power grab in the Soviet Union. That for one. And for another thing, from the outset, he had close ties to Fradkov, head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, who had built an impressive career in these structures.
Большую карьеру имел в этих структурах с самого начала. Маленький, вот такой. Это скорее в Швейцарии, во Франции такие старые дома переделывают. Я с бассейном, например, не люблю. Они умеют, из малого сделать.
We'll show all this on TV. Go on, go on. And we're back in Petrograd, which over this time has changed its name to Leningrad, and then to Saint Petersburg. In this city, where the Chekist Yanis Avens once served in Lenin's guard, the grandson of Lenin's cook and the grandson of Lenin's Chekist finally crossed paths. It is often said, what could you possibly have against Petr Aven? He's just a businessman, and he did indeed become one. But at the start of his close friendship with Vladimir Putin, he was still a government official. In essence, a Soviet, post-Soviet man, or neo-Soviet to be precise. So, how did this beautiful friendship actually start? Aven has a personal relationship with Putin. He is not just another Russian oligarch connected to the regime, as all of the Russian oligarchs are. This is a different, very important, and public story. Aven saved Putin from criminal charges. I must stress this, criminal charges, for his involvement in the very loud Salye case, which was actually the starting point of this regime. There were machinations, there was corruption, export sales of metal and oil to get funding for the very beginnings of this regime. Aven saved Putin from criminal investigation. A KGB officer who joined Anatoly Sobchak's team, he was the one who, for some reason, started this allocation of export quotas. Very soon, Putin's strange activities, which had no real legal grounds, attracted the attention of an investigation that was being conducted by the city council deputies, an inquiry widely known as the Salye case. Marina Salye, founding member of Leningrad's People's Front, deputy of the Legislative Assembly of Saint Petersburg. The city was left without food because the government hid part of it away. And also because there wasn't enough. There was a shortage of food in the country. Ration cards had to be issued for the food that was still there. This rationing allowed us to stabilize the situation for a while. And then I learned I heard rumors that we had been allocated quotas for lumber, oil, metal, rare metals, aluminum, cotton, and other things, so we could barter. And this is what happened. The contracts were given to some bogus companies that only existed for a day. The licenses were issued by the Saint Petersburg Committee for External Relations. That is, by Putin. They were signed by him personally, although rarely, and by his deputy, Anakin, whose first name I don't remember. They had no authority to issue these licenses. And these goods were exported abroad. But the food never came. This incident really strengthened the link between Putin and Sobchak. This is a protocol of cooperation between the City Council of St. Petersburg and the Russian Ministry for External Relations. And then came a decree, and Gaidar signed off on it. I wouldn't know, but the journalist Ivanidze is of the opinion that Gaidar's signature was forged. I cannot rule it out at all, because the dates on the documents have been changed several times over, especially on Aven's papers. It was an absolute grift. This absolute grift that Marina Salye describes became the cornerstone of their relationship. Here's an example. We all remember Boris Berezovsky, who was even nicknamed the godfather of the Kremlin, but who introduced Berezovsky to Putin. Boris Berezovsky, member of the State Duma of the Third Convocation, executive secretary of the CIS, businessman, member of Boris Yeltsin's inner circle. You know, I've known Putin for a long time, and very little. I've known him since 1990. We were introduced by a man who has since introduced me to several other people who are of great importance to me. His name is Petr Aven. I met Putin in Saint Petersburg when he came there as part of a delegation received by the now late Sobchak. That's where Putin and I met. And now, let us return to Latvia, Madona region. Current days. This is a sparsely populated area, an unlikely spot to find a prominent personality like an oligarch from Putin's inner circle. Usually, visitors from Moscow choose more traditional haunts, like Yurmala, the preferred meeting place of visiting celebrities. But Petr Aven's tastes are a little different. He has acquired an impressive property with 2 lakes right here, in Madona municipality. And today, we are paying him a visit. It's immediately obvious that visitors are discouraged and disliked. Putin's friend strongly prefers isolation because it is so much easier to work in peace and quiet. And should uninvited guests arrive at the house, they will be met by a well-trained security team. These guards have good cars and impressive kit. But this will not stop us from taking a look at Putin's oligarch's life here in Latvia. It's quite difficult to get a peek beyond this fence, but we can try. This is an aerial view of the Latvian estate of one of Russian dictator Putin's closest friends and associates. The drone is flying over his property, his private lakes, and then stops. What's happening? It is being targeted with an electromagnetic cannon in the hope of shooting it down. Unsuccessfully. Soon, another drone appears. Its task is to spy on the film crew. We live in a rule of law state, where laws are strictly observed, but we have little desire to find out just how strictly they are observed by the Madona Komsomol thugs in their black trucks on these forest roads. Pulse Gobel, analyst, researcher, and publicist, special advisor to U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, decorated with the Latvian Order of the 3 Stars.
I think we're talking about an oligarch, but that isn't all he is. He was an oligarch in the sense that he's someone who has a great deal of money, that it's closely, he continues to have it because he's closely related to political power, and he works on behalf of that political power in order to make himself even richer. So the idea that it's either an oligarch or an agent is a mistake. He wouldn't be the one if he weren't the other. No one has a lot of money in Russia unless he's working for Vladimir Putin. That means that we can't look at these groups, at rich capitalist Russians, as being somehow an independent force. They are creatures of the Putin system. The great problem that the West has with respect to this is during the Cold War, those who opposed Soviet expansionism consisted of 2 groups. The business community, which did not want to see the state own businesses, and the human rights community that wanted human rights and democracy. The as long as the big business community could be kept from going over to the other side, as it were, by calling them soft on communism, that alliance stayed together. As a result of the Gorbachev era, the former alliance in the West between the human rights people and the business community disappeared. And the business community began to view what it saw as its Russian counterparts as its allies, which has had the effect that the West has not understood that the people who have the big business types in Russia are fundamentally different than themselves. That has given Vladimir Putin enormous advantages in penetrating other societies, undermining governments, and it is something that unless it's recognized and unless it's contested, the future for the West is not good at all.
Well, if I understand right, we can speak about any big business from Russian Federation and, for example, about Alpha Group and personal about Aven, like instrument of political influence of Moscow.
Yes, beyond any question. The categories that we have, political influence and economic power, are in some sense irrelevant to the current situation. One of the biggest sources of Vladimir Putin's strength, his power, if you will, is that he doesn't make that distinction. He sees the two things as being together, and the West acts as if they're separate, which means that when it sees someone from the Russian embassy doing something, that can be described as political. But when he sees a businessman doing the same thing, that's viewed as economic activity. And while there's still a great deal of support for the idea that we should limit what the Russian embassy does, there's less support than there should be for limiting Russian oligarchs a la Aven, because they're viewed as like us in some ways. Well, they aren't. And that the Putin economic and political system is different. The role of people with money is different because they have that money, because they are working with and for Vladimir Putin. It is not as if they are big businesses who could challenge the regime. That's not on. If you have a lot of money in Russia today, you have it because you are cooperating with the Kremlin. If you do not cooperate with the Kremlin, you will soon not have that money, and you may soon not have your life. That just has to be understood. It isn't, unfortunately, and anything one can do to make people aware of that the real threat is coming from people who won't be defined as political, but as economic actors. As long as people in the West insist on treating Russian businessmen as if they were the same as American businessmen, they will get it wrong. It's a fundamentally different situation. The nature of wealth and ownership and power inside Russia is different than it is in Latvia or France or the United States.
In Putin's mind, which is a mix of KGB thinking and criminal thinking, any entrepreneur is a dodgy buyer of stolen goods, to be shaken down for money. But Petr Aven is a different kind of man. No, not Aven. He's all right. Everything's fine with him. We'll still have a chat about the Alpha Group. Petr Aven, who served the Soviet state, worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and covered for Putin. Saving him from criminal prosecution is a kindred soul, a comrade, someone you can trust. But then, in a very strange manner, Petr Aven leaves his government post to take up the banking business. And another miracle, he quickly becomes very successful. The Alpha Group goes into business. Alongside government and military commissions, the Alpha Group also bankrolled pseudo-oppositionary projects. In short, it served the Kremlin's shadow political interests. Free elections and similar democratic expressions in Russia were all but eliminated at the very outset of Putin's rule. But the facade remains in place. There emerges a system created by Gleb Pavlovsky and Vladislav Surkov. At its core, it is an authoritarian regime, which retains some pseudo-democratic appearances. In particular, this illusion was maintained by pseudo-opposition movements and parties. Behind the scenes, however, these entities were collaborating with the president's administration, receiving instructions and, it's worth noting, also money from the regime. The setup was simple. Under Putin's rule, the president's administration usually paid their people in cash. Something like this. Yes. That was Kristina Potupchik of the pro-Putin circles, and she was not at all embarrassed to receive these packs of dollars. Money literally by the sackful. But then a question arises. What is the provenance of this cash? Did the president's administration take it from their accounts, or did it come from some secret FSB slush fund? Not at all. FSB or Chekists don't like to part with their money. They're much happier taking it. There were special Putin wallets, special financial structures put in place just for the purpose of buying the loyalties of pseudo-oppositionary, pseudo-protesting entities. One of the people who collaborated with the administration, Rostislav Murzagulov, who has since emigrated and become an opposition blogger, claims this money was provided by Alpha Group. Rostislav Murzagulov, former chairman of the House of Representatives of Bashkortostan, foreign agent. Sometime in the 2010s, I was standing by the window in the Putin administration offices drinking whiskey with my then acquaintance, who was a big shot in the Kremlin. His name was Habirov. He curated the State Duma, unions, public organizations, and many other things. He was a favorite with Surkov, the Gray Cardinal. He seemed like a nice guy at the time. Outside that window was a beautiful inner courtyard, and as we were standing there, a shiny, glamorous, probably armored Alpha Bank truck drove into this yard and began to unload black sacks of cash. A lot of them. My acquaintance didn't even try to deny that this was the infamous black money from Friedman, meant for Surkov's people's work with the public and bonuses for valuable employees. He said Leonid Volkov, the chairman of the FBK, would soon be dropping by for his black bag of money. And not just for the money, but also for some advice, suggestion, and comments. Alexei Navalny may have been a somewhat controversial figure, but he was also, without a doubt, an ideological and consistent opponent of Putin, a man ready for any sacrifice. As a result, he gave his life for his nation's freedom and the demise of Putin's tyranny. We can say this about Alexei Navalny. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the people whom Navalny trusted and who are now peddling his name. In 2022, Ukraine came under full-scale attack from the Russian Federation. Ukrainians are putting up a heroic defense, and not just on the front lines where soldiers and territorial defenders fight shoulder to shoulder. Ukraine's fight also includes diplomacy. The most significant achievement of this diplomacy is the imposition of sanctions. Because the force of the free world's opposition to Putin's tyranny is the key to Ukraine's victory. In effect, the battle for sanctions is just another front line in the fight against Putin's regime. And this is where Ukraine gets stabbed in the back. The attack is unexpected and treacherous. It comes from those who have the nerve to call themselves Navalny's team. In 2022, covertly, without anyone knowing, Leonid Volkov, chairman of the FBK, writes a letter to the European Commission in which he extols the virtues of the people from Alpha Group. Friedman, Khan, and of course, Petr Aven. In the name of his foundation, and hiding behind Navalny's name, Volkov begs the Commission to drop the sanctions imposed against the leaders of the Alpha Group, sanctions against Putin's oligarchs. Publicly, he remains an impassioned opponent of the Putin regime. But secretly, out of sight of his supporters and European sympathizers, he lobbies Alpha Group interests. It would seem that the FBK and Alpha Group have a lot in common, and have done so for a long time. And this document proves that this enduring connection has not been broken. The relationship is maintained even now, after the start of Putin's aggression, and FBK is in the service of the Alpha oligarchs. What is the sweetest thing in Latvia? Some would say it's Lima chocolate candy. Others would name Riga black balsam. But in Petr Aven's view, they would all be wrong. Because the sweetest of prizes is here, right behind me. The Cabinet of Ministers. Government. Power. To Aven and Alpha Group, nothing could be sweeter. And today, we can confidently assert that shortly before 2014, Alpha Group, with the Kremlin's knowledge, of course, wanted to implement here a political scenario along the lines of the one currently playing out in Georgia. So what did happen in Georgia? In 2008, when war broke out in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, it seemed the Moscow-Tbilisi relations had broken down for good. On that occasion, Putin's aggression was successfully stopped, thanks in part to the consolidated position of NATO, the unity of the US and their European allies. It might have seemed that Putin had been defeated, and that Georgia would now stay firmly on the path of European integration. But just a short time later, Mikhail Saakashvili, author of Unique Reforms and builder of the miracle that was the Georgian economy, is already behind bars. And power is in the hands of a political party that advocates a union with Moscow and blames this war on Saakashvili. Georgian democracy was hit from within. The blow came from the criminal circles, the oligarchs, financial groups with Moscow connections. A very similar thing was meant to happen in Latvia. Former President Zatlers claims in his memoirs that all Latvian oligarchs were more or less Moscow-oriented in their business affiliations and political links. But one of the closest advisors to Zatlers and the Latvian establishment of that era, a sort of Virgil in the hell of Moscow realities, was Petr Aven. Petr Aven was actively cultivating his positive image. But after his speech, Petr Aven allowed himself to compliment the Latvian government. The overall government line is very reasonable. In the current economic situation, fiscal prudency and the rest of it is to be commended. Perhaps no great achievements yet, but I subscribe to their general approach. This prompts the question, where, in that case, are the Russian investments in Latvia? There are so many Russians in Yurmala. They're vacationing, but what about investments? It's just too small of a country. And why there's no interest? Medium business might have some interest, but there are Russian investors here. Of course there are. Quite a few. Aven's former colleague, former banker and current Latvian president, Andris Bērziņš, was generally optimistic in his forecast for Latvian-Russian relations. He served as a guide to all significant Latvian political contacts in Moscow. And at some point, he found a new objective: becoming the Prime Minister of the Republic of Latvia. Yes, right now, in 2025, the idea seems wild. But at the time, this plan was considered in all seriousness. The press even started publishing articles on the merits of appointing Petr Aven the Latvian Prime Minister. The goal of this plan is clear: build a government of pro-Kremlin forces and include an oligarch from Putin's inner circle. This government, in turn, would have veto power within the European Council and NATO. This would have been an unprecedented prize for the Kremlin: a golden share in NATO, a golden share in the European Union. And this golden share was to be delivered by none other than Petr Aven. The idea that Petr Aven could become Prime Minister of Latvia was disseminated by an old comrade of his, Alexander Goffin. After this, Goffin was forced to leave his rather lofty post at Alpha Bank. But he did remain on good terms with Petr Aven and gained a position at the no less influential Latvian institution, Rietumu Banka. There really is no such thing as an independent oligarch, independent entrepreneur. They all have their particular roles, which they dutifully play. It has also been said, and I would agree, that in Russia, under this regime, the oligarchs don't really own their businesses and their funds. They are simply managers. Yes, they do use their capital. They are very wealthy, but they are managers. In reality, everything they own belongs to the system. No oligarch can be independent. But I would like to reiterate that Aven's role is special because of his close and personal ties with Putin. Paul Goebel agrees.
As I said at the beginning, the idea that you're one or the other and that you can be labeled you're this or you're that, follows a Western habit of mind that is not appropriate for the Russian context. Mr. Aven would not have the funds he had if he were not a friend of Putin. He may have gotten some of it before he became a friend of Putin, but he got more once he became a friend of Putin, and he would lose everything if he ceased to be a friend and an agent of Mr. Putin. That's just the reality of Russian economic and political life. So I think those who continue to want to divide the world between political actors and economic actors in the era of Vladimir Putin are making a fundamental mistake. I think with respect to the Russian Federation today, those two categories are fused rather than being separate and self-standing.
In 2015, Petr Aven tries to gain citizenship based on his descent. He is part Latvian. As is the procedure in these cases, he takes an exam to prove his proficiency of the Latvian language and fails it. It turns out Aven knows very little Latvian. But this does not faze him. And in April 2016, This matter is unexpectedly resolved. This decision is preceded by a rather peculiar conversation between businessman Guntis Ravis and the notorious Edgars Jaunups. The conversation was captured by the Corruption Prevention and Combating Bureau, or KNAB for short. The two businessmen discuss slipping a tenner to some chairman of the examination board, obviously. Whether the tenor was slipped or not, in April 2016, Petr Aven successfully passed his exam despite objections from one of the members of the exam board. KNAB was unable to obtain legal proof of corruption, but did find signs of preferential treatment, whatever that may be.
Что бы это ни значило.
That he has such enormous amounts of money that he can work, that he is working hand in glove with the Putin regime, which has made little secret of its desire to suppress Latvia's independence, to end Baltic membership in NATO, to end the independence of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. That's a threat. The idea that it isn't a threat is dangerous. Anytime someone has that kind of money and that kind of political support from the Kremlin, they are a threat. I worry very much that Mr. Aven may very well have gotten his citizenship under in some kind of illegitimate way. I don't know the precise details, but I think that given the nature of the challenge that someone like that represents, that's something that should be investigated very carefully.
По сведениям наших
Our sources say Petr Aven's links to Russian or neo-Soviet intelligence services are not a thing of the past. Their collaborative efforts are ongoing. According to information provided by our Moscow sources, one instance of such cooperation took place very shortly before the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We are talking about Petr Aven's ties to head of the Russian Federal Security Service, General Sergei Beseda. Beseda was in charge of putting together the analytical data, the intellectual plans for the so-called special military operation. But his efforts were less than impressive. Next, let us simply quote our source in Moscow. Aven has been Putin's friend and wallet for the entire duration of Putin's hold on power. One of his projects was General Beseda. His friendship with Petr was no secret in Moscow. They went on bar crawls together and so on. They used Petr's jet, perhaps a charter, to go hunting, etc. Helicopters too. Petr knew all the details of the plan and was involved in the preparations. Beseda was the supervisor, but Petr bankrolled it. With Friedman's blessing, of course. We are not naming our sources in Russia. And some will certainly doubt the veracity of this information. So let us reiterate the facts that are known and have been proven. Let us ask our friends and colleagues who are fighting in Ukraine, what was the role of Alpha Group on the eve of the Russian military aggression and beyond? Pavlo Shkurenko, Sanctions Policy Advisor, Kyiv School of Economics.
So I can start overall with this idea if a person can be just businessman. So of course, a lot of military industry companies, they are businesses, right? So they make products, they sell them, they receive money, and this is how they work. Some of these products are missiles, some of these products are drones. Right now, actually, in Kyiv, we have the air raid alert because the drones are incoming, and the drones were manufactured probably at Alabuga Special Economic Zone, which is a business enterprise. Specifically for Alpha Group, their involvement in Russian military industry is not that direct. They are not they don't own companies that produce weapons directly, but there are connections to other units of Russian military and Russian military industry. For example, the insurance arm with Страхование or Alpha Insurance, they sent contracts. They service Sukhoi company, which later was rolled into OAK. And then Alpha Insurance also has had contracts for insuring Rosgvardia. And those contracts were for insuring vehicles, if I'm not mistaken. And then also they had direct contracts with specific army units, войсковая часть, that were legally under FSB purview. And so this is for the insurance arm. Then directly Alpha Bank was providing services to Russian railways, and Russian railways is the main logistics operator that supports the invasion. And also a smaller company, which is like a state main transport and leasing company, where it was also receiving loans from Alpha Bank. And then another company in Alpha Group is Alpha Leasing, and they were providing services to Baltic Shipyard, which manufactures submarines.
These facts were the reason why the Ukrainian government, on the advice of the National Security and Defense Council, imposed sanctions against Alpha Group and against Aven personally. Aven and his friend Friedman have a hobby, an aristocratic pastime, hunting. They have their own hunting lodges in Russia, but somehow killing animals in Russia was not enough. And so they also frequented a rather interesting Eastern European country. We'll let the original sources tell us about the trip they took with people from Putin's administration. This audio recording was published as part of a criminal investigation, which was opened, strangely enough, in the Russian Federation. I haven't had any dealings with the Hungarians. What are they like? They're the best right now. Germans and Hungarians are currently the biggest consumers of our gas and oil because they don't have their own. Their prime minister was the first to sign up for South Stream. He came over from Hungary. They're just gasping for it. And the prime minister is really with Putin. There are some people there from the administration who direct him. Probably yes. We just take them to Hungary to hunt. Aven gets a plane. There's also hunting in Hungary? Sure there is. It's great. We don't know which Hungarian organized all this hunting, but it seems quite curious that both Aven and his friends regularly visited Hungary. It's possible these visits are not just about their passion for this bloody and aristocratic sport. Perhaps there were other motives. After all, for reasons unknown to the wider public, the government of Hungary, and more recently also Slovakia, actively lobbies for the lifting of the personal sanctions imposed against Aven and Friedman. Borjomi, the legendary mineral water. People who have experienced life in the Soviet Union will definitely remember it, as will those who have watched certain Soviet movies. The drink of choice for creative intellectuals and hungover alcoholics. What exactly is this mysterious IDS Borjomi Europe? The sanctions imposed against Petr Aven and his Alpha Group colleagues froze all Alpha assets, including the Borjomi company, which also belonged to Alpha Group. Its representative in Europe, IDS Borjomi Europe, which was controlled by Alpha Group and, accordingly, by Aven, was likewise hit by sanctions. Interestingly, despite these sanctions, Borjomi water was still being sold by many, although not all, retail chains in Latvia and Lithuania. We noticed this and contacted law enforcement agencies, asking them to investigate how and why a sanctioned company continues its commercial activities. You can't do that here. Why? Then suddenly, in the autumn of 2024, people who called themselves liberals, fighters against Putin's regime, opposition, Navalny's team, started to show a lot of concern and interest in the fate of this company and Borjomi water. It may be that their interest is not due only to this company's direct ties to Aven. Just around this time, in the autumn of 2024, Ukraine, at the initiative of the Ministry of Justice, began court proceedings regarding the confiscation and nationalization of IDS Borjomi assets in Ukraine. It would be nice to show the Ukrainian judges a piece of paper that says, "Look, IDS Borjomi is being slandered. It is a campaign ordered by malicious oligarchs." It would be a good move. It is quite clear why Aven needs this. Quite clear why Alpha Group needs this. It is not clear why this would be needed by people who claim to be opponents of Putin's and the oligarchs. Aven's Generation Foundation is officially a charitable institution, but it might be just another tool for expanding influence in Latvian creative intellectual circles, or perhaps simply for corrupting them. With unlimited amounts of money at your disposal, it's not that difficult to do. Over the years, Petr Aven has met countless interesting and famous people. He's well known in Jurmala, where people like famous ex-Soviet and now probably Latvian singer Laima Vaikule will gladly spend time in his company. The overarching question is this: does Petr Aven pose a threat to Latvia's national security? I think it's a very significant threat to the national security of Latvia. To be honest, I don't understand why the Latvian government allows this individual to stay in Latvia. In 2022, the position of the Latvian government and public opinion was unambiguous. Aven was placed under sanctions. He was even stripped of his Order of the Three Stars. We asked then Chancellor of the Chapter of Orders, Sarmita Elerte, to comment on this decision. On March 2, 2022, the Chapter of Orders made the decision to withdraw the honors awarded to Petr Aven. The reasons for this decision is laid out in the information page of the Chapter of Orders. The decision of the Chapter of Orders is based on Section 48, Paragraph 2 of the Law on State Honors. I have no new or additional information regarding Petr Aven or the decision of the Chapter of Orders. At an extraordinary meeting, the Chapter of Orders decided to strip Latvian citizen Petr Aven of the Order of the Three Stars. Chancellor of the Chapter of Orders, Sarmita Elerte, notes, the Order of the Three Stars, the highest state honor, is bestowed for meritorious service to Latvia. Latvia's national interests are peace and security in Europe. Russia's war against Ukraine is a violation of international law, a crime against the Ukrainian nation. Petr Aven has not distanced himself from the war caused by the Putin regime. This means support for Russian aggression, which is incompatible with the status of a bestowed person. It cannot be offset by previous merits of the person. For now, Aven is under sanctions, but he remains in Latvia. In spite of everything, he's not about to leave the country. We don't know what holds him here, but it must be a weighty reason, judging by what we've learned from all our experts in the US, in Ukraine, Lithuania, and of course, Latvia. He seems to have a political mission, a task given by Putin. Right now, Latvia is in the second echelon of the global fight between forces of tyranny and the free world. Ukraine is on the contact line, fighting a full-blown war, and we are just a step behind. The next strike will most probably target Latvia, and most probably be a hybrid strike. And in a situation when we should be reinforcing the front, a question arises: what is happening behind our lines? If such a dangerous and hostile force is already present in the rear, what use is it to strengthen the front lines? And is it even the front? The threat is real and enormous. It may come to a replay of 1940 in the form of hybrid warfare. And the main strike force of this new version of 1940 is already here in Latvia. For now, we can talk about it freely. And to preserve this freedom, a most serious effort has to be made. We must secure the rear to safeguard this freedom for the next generations. Directed by Leonidas Jakobsons. Script by Dmitry Savin. Camera operator declined to be named for safety reasons. Editor declined to be named for safety reasons. Materials used in the film were obtained from open sources. The film features a video excerpt from Marina Salye's interview to Radio Liberty. Fair use in accordance with USC 17, Section 108. P.S. Any serious documentary must include the positions of all the parties involved. And naturally, before starting work on this film, we posed our questions to Petr Aven. We did this in two ways: through his official website and through his famed assistant, Igor Bass. The questions were as follows: do you support the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation? Do you support the Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine? Is Russian dictator Vladimir Putin your friend? Is it true that you saved him from criminal charges in 1992? Is it true that Alpha Group bankrolled the Anti-Corruption Foundation? To what extent? Explain why the FBK and Leonid Volkov and Vladimir Ashurkov personally, demanding the lifting of European sanctions against you. Under what circumstances did you obtain Latvian citizenship? Is it true you do not speak the Latvian language and were forced to give a bribe through Jaunups? What was the amount of the bribe? Explain how and under what circumstances Alpha Group has supported the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation since 2014. How profitable, in terms of material and financial assets, has the aggression against Ukraine been for you personally? Have you engaged in lobbying Kremlin interests in the U.S.? With whom did you contact? How much money was spent? To our greatest disappointment, neither Petr Aven himself nor his closest assistant, Mr. Boss, provided us with any answers.